17-year-old Christopher Davis is standing beside his Toyota Celica on Browntown Road near Scape Ore Swamp. It's after 2 in the morning and he just has finished changing a flat tire. He puts the jack and tools back in the trunk, lowers the lid, and turns toward the driver's side. That's when he notices something near the trees. A tall figure is moving toward the road. Christopher freezes. The figure keeps coming. It doesn't drop to all fours. It stays upright. Long arms swing at its sides. As it reaches the edge of the road, Christopher catches the shine of red eyes and hands with only 3 fingers. Then it breaks into a run. Christopher lunges for the car. He yanks open the driver's door, throws himself inside, and turns the key. The engine catches. The figure is still coming as he throws the car into gear. The Celica surges forward. For a few seconds, Christopher has open road in front of him. Then something slams onto the roof. The metal buckles above his head. A hand curls over the edge of the windshield. Christopher jerks the wheel, trying to throw it off, but it doesn't let go. Whatever had charged out of the darkness is no longer chasing the car. It's riding on it. Most legends begin long after the people at the center of them are gone. Names change, details get added. Places take on reputations they never had before until the story starts to feel like it's always been there. This one happened differently. Before anyone called it the Lizard Man, before crowds searched the swamp, before the national headlines, there was only one frightened teenager trying to explain what happened on a dark road outside Bishopville. I'm your host, Robert Barber. In the summer of 1988, 17-year-old Christopher Davis said something came out of the darkness near Scape Ore Swamp and chased him down Browntown Road. At first, the story belonged only to Christopher and the people who knew him. Then another damaged car drew the sheriff into the investigation. Within weeks, reporters were arriving in Bishopville. Strangers were searching the swamp, and whatever Christopher believed had chased him now had a name. This is the story of the Lizard Man of Scape Ore Swamp and the teenager whose late-night drive became one of South Carolina's most enduring unexplained encounters. And this is State of the Unknown. Christopher Davis was 17 in the summer of 1988. He worked a late shift at a McDonald's in Camden, South Carolina. On the night of June 28th, his shift ran late, and by the time he started driving home, it was already well past midnight. The route back toward Bishopville carried him through rural Lee County. The houses thinned out and the road passed low fields, woods, and swamp. Near Browntown, it ran alongside Scape Ore Swamp. Christopher was driving a Toyota Celica when, sometime around 2 in the morning, one of the tires went flat. He pulled onto the side of Browntown Road. There wasn't anyone else around to help, so Christopher opened the trunk, took out the jack and spare, and changed the tire himself. He raised the car, removed the damaged tire, secured the spare, and lowered the Celica back onto the road. Then he gathered the tools and put them into the trunk. And this is where we return to the moment from our opening. Christopher said he became aware of something near the trees or along the edge of the field. At first, it was only a figure moving toward the road. Then it came closer, and closer yet. Christopher would later say the figure stood roughly 7 feet tall. It didn't move the way he expected. It stayed upright as it crossed toward him. Then he caught its eyes. They reflected red in the darkness. As it closed the distance, he saw long arms reaching almost to its knees and hands with only 3 fingers. He would later describe its body as green and wet, with skin that reminded him of scales. It wasn't slowing down, it was coming straight at him. So Christopher ran. He rounded the car, reached the driver's door, climbed inside, and started the engine. The figure kept coming. Christopher threw the Celica into gear and pulled away. According to the version he later gave, the figure reached the car and came up onto it as he accelerated down Browntown Road. Christopher jerked the wheel, trying to throw it loose. It stayed with him. He kept the Celica moving, swerving and braking until the figure finally came off. Christopher didn't stop to look back. He kept driving until the swamp disappeared behind him. When he reached home, he went inside. For nearly 2 hours, he kept what had happened to himself. Then, he finally told his parents. Sheriff Liston Truesdale would later say that Christopher was badly shaken when he came home. His parents waited. Eventually, Christopher began to speak. He told them about the flat tire, the figure near the road, and the pursuit that followed. He described something tall that moved upright, with long arms, red eyes, and hands that didn't look human. At one point, Christopher reportedly told people that when he first saw it, he thought it might be the devil. He didn't go straight to the sheriff's office. The next morning came, then another. For roughly 2 weeks, the account stayed among Christopher's family, friends, and the people around him. Then Tom and Mary Way walked outside and found damage to their Ford LTD. The Ways lived in the Browntown area, not far from Scape Ore Swamp. Their car had been parked outside overnight. Chrome molding had been pulled or torn away. There were scratches and dents along with damage around the hood ornament. The Ways contacted the Lee County Sheriff's Office. Deputies came to the property and examined the Ford. Around it, they reportedly found muddy marks, possible tracks, and strands of hair. Some accounts also described tooth marks or damage that looked as though an animal had chewed at parts of the car. There were no witnesses that had seen it happen. The Ways had gone to bed with the Ford parked outside, and by morning, something had worked at the trim and left marks across the vehicle. Sheriff Liston Truesdale started asking questions. Had anyone nearby seen a large animal? Had anything unusual been reported along Browntown Road? As people talked, someone mentioned the teenager who had come home frightened 2 weeks earlier. Christopher had stopped on the same road. He'd described something large enough to reach a moving car. Soon, a message reached him. The sheriff wanted to talk. Christopher sat down with Sheriff Truesdale and told him what happened. He described leaving work late, driving home along Browntown Road, and pulling over after the tire failed. He walked the sheriff through changing the tire, putting away the tools, and noticing the figure moving toward him. He described the red eyes, the skin, and the 3-fingered hands. Then he explained how he ran toward the Celica and how he drove away while it struck or climbed onto the car. Truesdale questioned him about the sequence. The sheriff later said Christopher appeared frightened and sincere. He also described him as shy and reluctant to receive attention. Christopher either drew the figure himself or helped produce a drawing based on what he had seen. The page showed a tall humanoid body with long arms, wide hands, and a reptilian appearance. The drawing, Christopher's statement, and the report on the Ways damaged Ford now sat together as part of the sheriff's investigation. It didn't stay local for long. A newspaper learned about the case, and before long, the sheriff's telephone began to ring. Christopher suddenly found himself repeating the same night to people he had never met. Reporters arrived in Lee County carrying notebooks, microphones, and television cameras. They asked him to describe the figure again, then took him back toward the road where the tire had gone flat. Christopher pointed toward the trees. He explained where he'd been standing and how quickly the figure had closed the distance. Editors pulled the same details from his account: the height, the red eyes, the green skin, and the three-fingered hands. Soon, Christopher's words and drawing were appearing in newspapers far beyond South Carolina. Some printed the image beside photographs of Sheriff Truesdale standing near the swamp. Headlines began calling it the Lizard Man. Christopher had never gone looking for a mystery. He was just trying to get home after work when a flat tire forced him to stop beside Scape Ore Swamp. Now he found himself standing beside Browntown Road with reporters, pointing toward the trees and describing the same few terrifying minutes over and over again. A private company began arranging appearances for him. Christopher was also given a polygraph examination and was reported to have passed. The result appeared in newspapers, and once again he was asked to repeat the account. He had told the sheriff what he saw. Now the same story was traveling farther than he ever had. And with every new headline, more cars began turning onto Browntown Road. Christopher kept answering the same questions. Where had he stopped? How close had the figure come? What exactly had happened when it reached the car? As he answered them, the sheriff's telephone kept ringing. Two men reportedly said something chased them near a spring in the swamp area. A group of teenagers later claimed that a large figure crossed the road in front of their vehicle. Other people called about movement near the trees, strange tracks in the mud, or damage they believed had been caused by the same creature. Truesdale and his deputies listened, took notes, and drove out to look at whatever people showed them. One call led them to scratched metal. Another ended at the edge of a road where someone said a figure had disappeared into the trees. The reporters followed. They carried Christopher's drawing with them and held it beside each new description. Was the figure upright? Did it have red eyes? Did it look like this? Every new report sent someone back to Christopher. He was asked whether the latest description sounded like the thing he had seen, even when the person making the report was someone he had never met. Along Browntown Road, cars slowed near the place where he said he changed the tire. Visitors stepped onto the shoulder and stared into the trees. Some carried cameras. Others went into the swamp with rifles. Christopher watched strangers search the same ground he had been trying to escape only weeks earlier. Sheriff Truesdale now had people moving through a rural area while his deputies drove between reported sightings and damaged property. A radio station offered a reward for capturing the creature alive. The amount was reported as $1 million. More cars appeared. Local businesses began printing T-shirts. Green figures with claws and red eyes hung in shop windows and moved across counters in paper bags. Christopher could see the thing that he had described appearing around town while reporters still wanted him to explain the night that created it. At interviews and public appearances, he kept returning to the same beginning. He'd been driving home. The tire had gone flat. He'd turned away from the trunk and seen something coming toward him. Outside, strangers were now walking into the swamp looking for it. By early August, reporters and searchers were still waiting for something they could photograph, collect, or carry out of the trees. Then Kenneth Orr walked into the sheriff's office with blood and scales. Kenneth Ore was 26 years old and stationed at Shaw Air Force Base. On August 5th, he told authorities he had encountered the lizard man near Highway 15. This time, according to Ore, the creature hadn't escaped. He said he had shot it. Then he placed blood and scales in front of investigators. After weeks of Christopher repeating what he had seen, someone was finally claiming to have brought back physical evidence. The material could be examined or could be questioned, and somewhere, according to his story, a wounded animal had disappeared. For a moment, the case appeared to have changed. Christopher's account was no longer the only thing holding it together. Then investigators began pressing Ore on the details. The story started to come apart. Ore eventually admitted he had made it up. He hadn't shot the lizard man. The blood and scales hadn't come from an unknown animal. He said he created the story because he wanted to keep public interest alive. Ore was charged with filing a false police report and also faced a weapons-related charge. Sheriff Truesdale had spent weeks receiving calls, speaking with reporters, and driving through the area around Scape Ore Swamp. Now he had a confession on his desk. Christopher, meanwhile, had to watch an admitted hoax become attached to the same name reporters had attached to him. Truesdale didn't say Ore's confession proved Christopher had lied. Ore had entered the story after the publicity began. He hadn't claimed responsibility for Christopher's encounter or the damage to the ways forward. Still, the next newspaper stories placed Ore's confession beside the words lizard man. Christopher's account now had to survive beside evidence someone had deliberately manufactured. The calls started to slow. Reporters packed their equipment. The armed searchers stopped arriving in the same numbers. By the end of the summer, no one had captured the creature. No clear photograph had appeared. No body had been recovered from the swamp. Christopher went back to his life. But when people recognized his name, they still knew him as the teenager who had seen the lizard man. Browntown Road was quiet again. So what do we actually have with the lizard man of Scape Ore Swamp? The strongest part of the case is also the simplest. Christopher Davis was a real 17-year-old driving home from a late shift when a flat tire forced him to stop near Scape Ore Swamp. He later reported that a large upright figure chased him and made contact with his car. That account didn't begin as an internet legend or a story passed down years later. It entered the public record in 1988 through the Lee County Sheriff's Office, newspaper interviews, wire service reports, and television coverage. Sheriff Liston Truesdale spoke with Christopher directly and described him as frightened, reluctant, and sincere. Christopher also continued to stand behind the central claim. He never announced that it had been a prank or a publicity stunt. That doesn't prove he correctly identified what he saw. It does mean the case begins with a named witness who appeared genuinely convinced that something had happened to him. The timing matters too. Christopher said the encounter occurred before the lizard man had a name, before crowds were searching the swamp, and before anyone was offering rewards or selling merchandise. His account became public only after the sheriff began investigating damage to the ways forward roughly 2 weeks later. That makes it difficult to argue that Christopher was simply reporting an existing local legend. The legend came after him. But once we move beyond that central account, the case becomes less secure. The details change between retellings. Some versions say Christopher had already closed the trunk. Others placed tools in his hands when the figure appeared. The creature walks toward him in some accounts and immediately runs in others. The contact with the Celica may have involved the door, the rear of the car, the trunk, the roof, or several of those in sequence. Even the way Christopher escaped shifts between swerving, accelerating, and braking. Those differences don't erase the encounter, but they matter because the most dramatic parts of the story are the least stable. The same uncertainty surrounds the reported damage to Christopher's car. Some retellings describe a dented roof, deep scratches, and a damaged mirror. Others mention little more than a scratch on the fender. There doesn't appear to be a complete, authenticated photographic record showing exactly what the investigators observed. So while Christopher unquestionably made the report, the physical evidence connecting his car to an attack is difficult to establish. The ways forward gives us something more concrete. Their vehicle was damaged, and deputies examined torn trim, scratches, dents, and marks around the car. Hair and possible tracks were also reported, but none of it was conclusively connected to the figure Christopher described. The hair doesn't appear to have produced a clear public laboratory result, and the reported tracks were never documented well enough to identify what made them. A bear is one conventional possibility. A large bear can stand upright, damage a vehicle while searching for food, and disappear quickly into wooded or swampy terrain. Reflected light might account for the red eyes. Wet fur or mud could have looked like rough skin, and a paw seen during a frightening encounter might have been remembered as something hand-like. But a bear doesn't neatly explain everything Christopher reported. He said the figure remained upright, ran toward him, and held onto the moving Celica. A bear explanation therefore requires an unusually aggressive encounter or the possibility that fear and later retelling altered parts of the sequence. There's also the later account involving Lucius Elmore. Elmore was reportedly guarding a nearby butterbean shed after thefts in the area. According to a later investigation, he heard a tire blow, approached the road, and saw Christopher react before driving away. That raises the possibility that Christopher saw a person emerging from the darkness and misunderstood what he was looking at. But Elmore's story surfaced later, and the circumstances around its first appearance are unclear. It might explain the figure near the road. It doesn't easily explain the reported attack on the car. The polygraph is sometimes offered as support for Christopher because he was reported to have passed. But the test was arranged privately by a company involved in booking appearances for him, not by law enforcement. Polygraphs don't determine whether an event happened. At most, they may suggest that someone believes what they are saying. Christopher could have been completely sincere and still have been mistaken about what he saw. The later reports are even harder to evaluate. Other residents described sightings too, including two men who said something chased them near a spring and a group of teenagers who reported a figure crossing the road. But by then, reporters, tourists, and armed searchers were already in the area. People had seen Christopher's drawing and heard about the height, the red eyes, and the three-fingered hands. That doesn't mean every later witness lied. It does mean they were no longer encountering the unknown without expectations. Kenneth Ore's hoax makes the problem worse. Ore's hoax didn't mean Christopher had made up his encounter. By the time Ore became involved, the story had already drawn widespread attention. But his confession showed that at least one person was willing to manufacture evidence to keep the story alive. From that point on, every later claim had to be considered beside a known hoax. So where does that leave us? Christopher Davis reported his encounter before the legend existed. The sheriff found him frightened and sincere. A second damaged car brought law enforcement to the same stretch of road. But the evidence never became strong enough to identify what Christopher saw or prove that an unknown animal attacked his car. A bear may explain part of the story. A person near the road may explain part of it. Fear, poor visibility, and later retelling may account for some of the changing details. Or Christopher may have encountered something that didn't fit any familiar category available to him. What we can't do is point to a clear photograph, a verified biological sample, or a body and say the question was settled. The case holds together as a documented human event. It remains unresolved as a creature case. What stays with me about Christopher Davis is how ordinary the beginning of his night was. He wasn't searching for anything. He wasn't visiting a haunted road or walking into the swamp with a camera. He'd finished work, gotten in his car, and started driving home. Then a tire went flat. Most of us have stood beside a car at the wrong time on a road where we'd rather not stop, trying to fix a problem so we can get moving again. He changed the tire, he put away the tools, and according to him, the world looked different when he turned around. Whatever happened over the next few minutes followed him for the rest of his life. Reporters arrived, his drawing was printed, and his name became attached to a creature, then a town, and finally to a legend people still celebrate decades later. That's a lot for any witness to carry. It's especially a lot for a 17-year-old who waited nearly 2 weeks before speaking to law enforcement. The public version of the lizard man became colorful and almost playful. There were shirts, festivals, rewards, and green figures standing beside roads. But Christopher's version was never playful. He said he was alone, something came toward him, and he barely escaped. That gap between a witness's experience and the community legend that grows around it appears in a lot of unexplained cases. A frightening event becomes a newspaper story. The newspaper story becomes folklore. Eventually, people can smile beside a statue of the thing that once sent someone running for his car. I don't think that the transformation necessarily disrespects the witness. Sometimes humor and celebration are how communities keep difficult stories close without living inside the fear that created them. Still, it's worth remembering that underneath the mascot was a person. Christopher didn't call it the lizard man when he first saw it. He didn't know there would be rewards or reporters. He only knew something was moving toward him and he needed to reach the car. Maybe he saw an animal under poor light and fear filled in the spaces he couldn't see. Maybe he saw a person near the road and the rest of the encounter took shape in the confusion that followed. Or maybe Christopher described the only language he had for something that didn't fit anything he knew. The evidence can't carry us much farther than that. What remains is that he carried the story consistently, enough that more than 30 years later, people still return to Browntown Road and look toward the trees. Not because everyone believes a reptilian creature lives in the swamp, but because one teenager said something happened there before anyone knew there was a story to tell. This has been State of the Unknown. Christopher Davis never gave people the final answer they wanted. He could describe the road, the figure, and the struggle to get away, but he couldn't tell anyone what had come out of the darkness that night. The searches ended, the crowds left, and Browntown Road went back to being a rural road beside a swamp. His account remained. If you've been enjoying these stories, leaving a rating or review in your podcast app really does help more people find the show. On Spotify, it's just a quick tap of the stars. On Apple Podcasts, you can even leave a short written review. I read them and I do appreciate everyone, so thank you. And if you want to make sure you don't miss the next story, just hit follow in your podcast app so it shows up automatically when it drops. Until next time, stay curious. And maybe a flat tire is only a flat tire. But if you ever have to change one besides Scape Ore Swamp, you may want to look toward the trees before you close the trunk.